Okay, I think we might get underway because we've got plenty to talk about here and we don't want to waste any time. I'd just like to welcome you all to this panel session on using new media to raise your research profile. The concept for this panel session was developed by the library after we ran a similar sort of a panel session earlier in the year at a national conference, and at that occasion Daniel was our host as well, and he did such a great job we thought we'd better do it again. But you might ask, why are librarians so interested in using new media for research? Libraries have always played a role in the dissemination of scholarship and research. Traditionally, that's been in books, journals, conference papers, etc., originally in print and now all nice and digital. But the new social media, such as blogs, Twitter, Facebook, are starting to transform not only how research is being disseminated, but also it's encouraging new ways of writing, new ways of explaining, and disseminating that information to much wider audiences than it ever would have reached before. So let's hear what our panel members have to say about the opportunities and pitfalls that can occur when you're using new social media to promote your research. The panel is being hosted by Daniel Brennan. Daniel completed his PhD earlier this year in political philosophy and lectures in philosophy and literature in the Foundation program. And I'll now hand over to Daniel, who will introduce you to the rest of the panel.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'd just firstly like to thank the library for the enormous amount of hard work they've done in putting this panel session together this morning. I'll introduce our panel members first and then we'll get into the discussion. From my immediate left, we have Dr. Katrina Bramstedt from the Faculty of Health Sciences and Medicine. Dr. Bramstedt is a clinical ethicist with over 10 years inpatient and outpatient experience, and Katrina has also authored the HSM social media policy. Next to her is Tracy Whitelaw, who is a HDR student and is also the social media strategist for the Brisbane City Council. Next to her, we have Professor Jeff Brand from the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. Dr. Brand has lectured in all things media and communications at Bond since 1994, and Dr. Brand's research on interactive media and audiences has led him to consult to industry and government on the policy implications of emerging media. Next to Professor Brand is Dr. Michael Rees, here from the Faculty of Business. Dr. Rees is a Fellow of the British Computer Society and publishes widely on the use of cloud technology for creating learning environments. Dr. Rees is also a former chair of the Social Media Club of the Gold Coast. And at the end of the panel, we have Peter Hopkins, who's a manager at Digital Library Services. Peter collaborated on a conference paper with Dr. Rees in the area of integrating social media with traditional information systems, and was on the executive committee, the executive group of the Social Media Club of the Gold Coast. Before we jump into the panel discussion, I will say that the slides from today's presentations are going to be live tweeted with links available to them, so you can access them yourself, and there is also the opportunity to live tweet to this event, if you like, at the hashtag Bond Research Week. You can either follow that hashtag or post to it. So for the first time in this room, you can leave your phones on. Okay, to begin, our first session is on digital footprints and your career. Last night at the gala dinner, the CEO of the ARC spoke passionately about the importance of community engagement with research. That engagement involves the disseminating of research to the wider community. This was a point he made a number of times. Social media facilitates this engagement with the wider community, and the ARC are looking to measure the impact of researchers' publications as they are disseminated through things like social media. And so it's important as researchers to manage and control what kind of digital footprint you're leaving so that you can disseminate your research most effectively. I'm going to throw it over to each of the panel members in turn to answer the following question by way of an introduction. What types of new media do you use to raise your research profile, and what are your experiences and challenges? Katrina?
I mostly use Twitter and LinkedIn. I announce all my abstracts, conference presentations, and any new articles that come out through those sources. And I actually also produce an ethics newsletter once a month that goes out to about 500 people, and that contains links and things relative to my research. So it's been, I think, pretty valuable. I gain a lot of academic and research connections, so it's been really good.
I also use LinkedIn and Twitter predominantly, but I do blog and I use Tumblr. I use Tumblr more as a way of capturing my own research and some of the key points that I want to remember. But I've had a lot of good experiences through LinkedIn and Twitter, especially around social media and emergency management. So by using the hashtag on Twitter, it instantly connects me to the whole community, and I've had quite a lot of conference opportunities and stuff through that as well.
And I have underbaked everything. I've got Twitter, which has right now 372 tweets and 367 followers. So I get one tweet and one follower per iteration. I have a blog which has a few pages on it. I have one video in YouTube, and I have LinkedIn where I ignore everybody.
Well, my main medium, I suppose, is blogging. In 2005, I was one of the first to introduce blogging for assessment in my teaching. And from 2006, I've kept a personal blog, mainly for professional use, mixes personal and professional and research. So I announce all my papers, all my thoughts, and seek remarks on new ideas via the blog. But in order to get traffic to the blog, it's essential you use Twitter, LinkedIn, some of the other social media tools that have already been mentioned. So I use those really as a driver into my blog where possible.
And I have to admit that I use a lot of the same tools. I've been blogging since about 2006. I think Michael got me started on that one. And I don't mix personal so much on there with professional stuff. It's really a place where I record what I'm trying out, what I'm experimenting with, and it's, mostly it's in the library sort of space, technology space. Twitter has been really super important to me. It's been absolutely fantastic in building a professional network of librarians and other information professionals all around the world, and being able to call on that network for their collective wisdom has been just, so valuable. And it also means that I've been able to build up a sphere of influence as well. And so out of those two main channels, a number of opportunities have come up for me, not least of which the paper that Daniel mentioned was a direct result from one of my blog posts where I decided I would write, if there were no constraints on me, what Web 2.0 tools would I use to provide services to staff and students here at Bond? And Michael read it and emailed me and said, would you like to collaborate on a paper? So it was this absolutely direct. I blogged, I got an offer. That was, there's been other opportunities since then. So, I think the values have outweighed any challenges. For me, I haven't really had any dramas that have come up in using social media in that way. Fingers crossed.
Okay, well, I'll throw it over to the panel members again. We've heard a lot about the opportunities. Peter just brought up that there can possibly be challenges to do with using social media. So I'll just ask if Katrina, Tracy, Jeff or Michael would like to comment on any specific challenges.
I myself haven't had one yet, knock on wood, but that's because I limit what I do on Twitter and LinkedIn and all that to strictly business. I don't do anything personal just because I don't want to run any sort of risks, probably because I am an ethicist, so my career is hugely sensitive in that area. So I just stay clear of it 100% and leave all postings and everything to purely business. So I haven't had anything, knock on wood.
I also haven't experienced any challenges, but I'm probably at the extreme opposite end of the spectrum, I think. So I am online all the time, constantly. I probably overshare, if anything. Mine's is a good mix of personal and research and business. So I think for me, I haven't had any challenges yet, but I'm trying to be slightly more, less of oversharing, I think, for me is a good thing. Yeah.
I might make the question a little bit more specific to the Jeff then. Jeff, are you aware of any kind of negative attention that researchers have been able to get inadvertently even through the use of social media?
Oh, absolutely, Daniel. I mean, many researchers who blend, and it's already come up here, their personal lives with their professional lives really struggle in this space, primarily because the activity of a researcher in their private life, and there's one in the US who's a psychologist who's an anti-games researcher, has affiliations with another not-for-profit sector in society, and that got picked up in social media and he got pilloried for it. So that's an interesting problem. For me, it's just my picture of me in a wetsuit on Facebook. It's been embarrassing. I was giving a keynote address in Melbourne, and the organizers, this is a big publishing event, said, "Do you have another picture of you other than the one in the wetsuit?" And I went, "Oh, damn." So, didn't realize that was all happening. So that's why I think I'm fairly conservative with it now.
Definitely. And Michael?
I haven't had really many great challenges, although I did have one rather nasty interaction with a guy who claimed to be the first blogger in the world. It so happened that a research student and myself in 1995, we actually invented the word weblog for a system that was sort of precursor to blogs. It wasn't a genuine blog as we now know it, but it was an online recording system for meeting minutes, and we called it a weblog. And so we're down in the electronic record as being the first to use the word, even though it's not directly connected to modern blogging. And I had a lot of exchange with this guy, but fortunately, because I'd blogged about it at a certain date, there in the record is, the true story, as it were. And so that is a very good use of blogs, I think. Get your ideas down in electronic form, and then you can always point back to that being a benefit. Perhaps the other downsides are, keeping motivation of blogging is, I find that, flags at times. I've got about 600 entries in my blog now, but the per annum rate is slowly declining. And that's why I turned to Twitter and LinkedIn, etc., to try and get more interest. Also, I would like to have had more feedback to my blog entries than I actually obtained, and again, that's a slight disappointment. But I tell you what, blogs are great for filling in your PDRs every year, because you just go back over the year and record stuff that you did. So from that point of view, as an aid memoir, it's good.
I think the other great thing with my blog as well, because I'm in a continuing professional development scheme with ALIA, and every so often, we are audited, and same thing, go back to the blog, everything's recorded there. Also, I guess social bookmarking I've used, so for my professional reading, if I bookmarked it, I can just go back and print out, here's everything I've read, that goes into the audit documents as well. In terms of challenges, one that Jeff mentioned the other day was, some of the challenges around managing relationships with funding bodies. Would you care to comment a bit more on that, Jeff?
I can't remember what I said.
I think it was to do with the timing of releasing information.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. Sorry, my apologies. A lot of times funding bodies have embargoes on what you can communicate related to projects. And if you get very excited about your research and pre-release your results or pre-release the parameters of the project, you can get into a great deal of difficulty. They may own the IP. You may need to clear that with them. They may also not want certain details of the project released until they've had a chance, for example, to communicate with, say, ministers in the policy research area. So it's one of the things, and I think, Tracy, you've touched on this, is the tendency to want to hit return on a post is really problematic. You really, for many of us, particularly where our research might be attached to funding, we've got to get permission constantly. I mean, I've got a project coming up that I'd love to just be talking about now, but it has to be controlled by the owners of the project.
Thank you. Michael brought up the topic of PDRs, and that's a nice segue into the next little section on alt metrics, because as I mentioned in the introduction, the ARC is looking to measure the impact of research through social media, and one of the tools they're using to do that is altmetrics. The way it was described to me was that the dog-eared journal articles and the in-hallway conversations of faculties have now been brought out of the office and onto the social media platform in a way that they can actually be measured. And so I'm going to throw it over to Peter to explain just what altmetrics are.
So altmetrics is a term that was roughly started coming into conversations probably about 2010. And it was proposed as a term to describe alternative measures to the personal citation indices such as the H-index and to journal impact factors. Commonly people use it to refer to article level metrics, so really just still focusing on the journal article. But in actual fact the types of measures could actually be broadened and applied to journals themselves, to books, to presentations, to audio-visual materials, to source code, to data sets and to people. So essentially it's starting to look at, well, how many mentions do you get in the blogosphere or on Twitter or Facebook? How many mentions of your data set perhaps is in a knowledge base? How many downloads? How many mentions in news media as well? So those are some of the different things that are used. There's a specific and a more general use of the term altmetrics as well. So there's the general term is what I've sort of described, but there's also an organisation or a company, I guess, altmetric.com, which provide a service in this area as well. And ePublications at Bond, the research repository, we actually have this altmetric.com integrated into our system. So any of the papers that are in there which have a digital object identifier, we have linked up now with an altmetric icon on the page which will display how many mentions. And when you click through onto that, you'll get to see something like this. So it will show you, and you can actually go and see, well, what are the most recent tweets, what are the most recent blogs or videos, or you know, whatever sorts of mentions are available. So that's quite a nice feature, new feature there.
Tracy, can I ask you what the Brisbane City Council does in monitoring social media?
Yeah. Basically, any large organisation, certainly anything that has a political nature or anything that is dealing with customers, we monitor everything in social media. So there's a bunch of free tools that anyone can use. So even as a researcher, I would say you should be monitoring what you're doing. If you're not, it's a little bit like stabbing in the dark. So you're kind of almost broadcasting in a vacuum a little bit. You don't actually know who's listening and who's replying. You don't know what your influence is. And so at Council, we monitor everything through a program called Radian 6, which is on the screen now. From that, we can basically look at who our influencers are, sentiment. We can look around emerging issues as well. Probably quite relevant, I guess, for research again, because you want to make sure that you're on top of what other people are doing also. So I use a lot of free tools to monitor my own kind of engagement online. But certainly for Council, enterprise tools like this, and probably for Bond as well, enterprise tools like this give you much greater detail. I often say that with a tool like this, you can start off knowing whether someone likes Bond Uni, for example, and by the time that you've drilled down, you know where they drink, you know their cat's name, and you know their last boyfriend. Like, that's the kind of information you get.
Really?
Yeah, I know. That might be terrifying to some people, but there's a lot of reasons for doing it. And one other thing, I guess, that's really important from these kind of metrics is that it teaches you how to be reciprocal. So if someone is extremely influential and you are blanket putting out broadcasts and not actually engaging with them, you're losing the opportunity that social media offers you. So it actually starts to pinpoint those influential people that you should be engaging with as well.
Okay, so there is such a thing then as twimpact, as the impact of research disseminated through Twitter. This is a really interesting fact up on the screen in front of you, that highly tweeted articles are 11 times more likely to be highly cited than less tweeted articles. That's kind of a call to action. If you're not using Twitter, then perhaps you really should be. How is this changing the behaviour of researchers? How is this new landscape changing the behaviour of researchers? The question that I want to ask Michael first is, what's the value of being an influencer rather than just counting the outputs?
Well, you judge this, of course, by the feedback you get on the tweets or LinkedIn status posts or whatever you do on social media, blog posts. And I found that by going back to the people who comment on you, of course, you immediately start to create a community of interest with people you've never met and perhaps are never likely to meet face to face. And this group, this community, has a direct impact on your research. They tell you to stop going down one alley and suggest you go down another. So it allows you to adjust the research to more meaningful public and community impact. So that's what I've found via social media. It helps drive the decisions where you have choices in your research. It helps you make the choice.
Katrina, can I ask you about the changing face of research?
Well, I think I'll give you an example. The biggest research project that's come my way has come by way of social media. So through LinkedIn, I had a press release come my way, and it was right in my research area, which is organ donation and transplantation. And reading that, it totally sparked my interest. I contacted someone that was mentioned in that press release, and I said, I think I could be really helpful to this project that you're going to start, and here are some ideas that I have. Well, within 2-3 days, this person wrote me back and said, wow, yes, you would be a great addition, and they sent me a sketch out of their project. I did some edits and this and that, and about 2 weeks after that, I was added to the team. And it's actually to create a new app for Facebook. So that is a huge project. It's probably the biggest thing on my CV right now, it's a pretty big CV, but that'll be the biggest thing. And it came by way of a social media drop into my box. So awesome. I think it can really change your research landscape if you can be good at deciphering what comes to you. I think you have some good opportunities.
Awesome. Jeff, can I get you to comment on this as well?
Yeah, sure. I see two ways in which research has been altered by social media. One of them, I think, is just methodology. As Aidan Burns said last night, a lot of research happens in a lot of different ways. And a lot of research doesn't get published in formal channels. I mean, I think of Professor Henry Jenkins at California. He's probably one of the leading social media experts. He's the author of a book on convergence and also spreadable media. And he's an Uber blogger, and he actually got his job, went from MIT to California, USC, as a result of his blogging profile. And it was just that it gave him the opportunity to produce more volume and to produce more content. I think the same thing you're saying, Michael. That just wouldn't otherwise get there. And what's really interesting is the methodologies that can result from that. I picked up an article just the other day, just thinking about this. Content analysis is a methodology in the social sciences that allows us to observe content in recorded media. Mm-hmm. Social media give us all of a sudden this explosion of content that we can reference and access. So researchers now are doing really interesting things like, looking at people's travel blogs to understand cultural diaspora. It's really interesting, and it provides us with some fantastic opportunities. The other way I think the impact has really shifted the way we do research and think about research is, I think, this touch point that Peter raised earlier, the impact on for example, social media and funders. But the idea that all of a sudden we want to release research very quickly into the community to do, as you pointed out, Daniel, what Aidan Burns said, and that is to connect with community. There is a much greater opportunity as a result of this content and these various channels. I mean, you're thinking about Prezi and the popularity of Prezi at the moment, people being able to put their research there, and it gets traction because it's interesting to people. So that's a great way to connect with the community. But I think it changes the nature of research because it makes you think more about whether or not you're getting traction more broadly than just in your academy.
Fantastic. That's a really nice segue, that explosion or the proliferation of research in many different ways into the next section of today. Social media and its ability to promote research is just so various in the different mediums that you can use. We have a quick video from Caro from Humanities and Social Science on a project her class did on infographics. Brilliant. Thanks, Caro. So then what other forms of new media are breaking the paradigm? Jeff, can I ask you to explain the Spartans Will Instagram project?
Oh, yeah, I like this. So I'm an alumnus from Michigan State University. It's quite a bit bigger than Bond, 50,000 students. So they have lots of resources, and when you have resources as a real big research institution, you can do amazing things. So Luann Simon, the president, it's like the vice chancellor, of Michigan State University, set up, that was out of the president's office, set up the Spartans Will 360, and it's a call in response, it's a response to the call that Obama made a few years ago to get more university students abroad. And it just leverages all aspects of social media. So they've got a Facebook page, they've got a Twitter page. They're doing really interesting things with the blog. Luann Simon puts up her blog, but this is, and they use Instagram, which is great. You know, there are snapshots of what researchers and students at Michigan State University, go Spartans, do all over the world. And one of the most poignant for me, and it's great as an expat American because you experience this when you finally get outside the hazy walls of the U.S., is these students going into Africa and see a sign in the airport that says foreigners, and they finally get hit with this idea that, hey, we're not in Kansas anymore. And it's lovely. It's this sort of beautiful statement about how you can have all of this social media but not be global. And then when you finally become global, the social media probably really matter to you. So I think it's a gorgeous testament to the potential power of social media.
Ah, definitely. And Jeff, can I ask you to explain Twitteriture, something I've only recently discovered?
Okay, so I love this, right? Because this is, I suppose, one of the most interesting. I'm really interested in what I can't do. I can't do this sort of thing. I wish I could. I wanted to tweet in response to that video just then, but I don't even have Caro's Twitter name. So I just, I'm really incapable of stuff, ultimately. But this is fantastic. If you wanted to get people to re-engage with texts that are really important in the canon of literature, how could you do it? Well, Twitter is one way. Just reimagine Don Quixote, in Twitter. 140 characters per little passage. I just love this, right? A castle, no drawbridge. Pretty shabby, if you ask me. Ask moi. I mean, it's just lovely. It's sort of this trash social media talk culture thing happening in conjunction with great literature, and it's a way to reconnect. So I think this sort of thing is interesting, but it also is interesting because it shows that the nature of publishing and the nature of storytelling is also changing. And it may be bad, it may be good. That's probably not as important as that it's just really interesting right now and is a testament to the youth. This is a picture of the youth of social media. It's only 11 years old, social media, right? More or less. So, I mean, that's just shows it in its infancy.
It's quite a funny example, actually. I mean, Don Quixote was meant to be a criticism of the pop culture reading language, and it's been taken over by that.
Can be reread.
Peter, can I ask you to make a comment about journals that have an open peer review policy?
Yeah, so although some people might think this is sort of new or something different, the actual first trial of a journal using open peer review was the Medical Journal of Australia back in 1996. And their conclusions from that trial was that there were modest benefits for authors, editors and readers. And since then there's been a number of journals which have taken up this idea of having open peer review before publication. Some of them actually publish immediately and then have review after publication. So there's different models for doing it, but Philica is another one, started in 2006. They publish immediately and review happens after publication. Nature experimented with parallel open and peer review, closed peer review for a while there, but they had some concerns that because they were doing it in parallel then there wasn't a particularly great take-up, so that was a bit problematic for them. 2006, a new journal, Biology Direct, published through Biomed Central. So it's been running for 7 years. Essentially, if a paper can get 3 reports from the editorial board or external reviews, then it will be published. And there is no anonymous review, and unreviewed articles are not published. And I have they've reported recently on how things have been going for them. So over the 7 years, 365 papers that have been accessed over 2 million times as of April. And they also say the journal's impact factor exceeded 4. 2 articles have been cited more than 100 times each, making them citation classics. 13 articles have been cited more than 50 times. So it's certainly, that model is not holding back with Biology Direct. They seem to be going from success to success. So, there's, journals working in that sort of space. In addition to open peer review, though, there's also this idea of open peer commentary, which has been enabled by, the commenting on blogs really sort of inspired that, I guess. And so the idea is after publication, people can actually still go and make commentary on a particular paper. And often it's that lively interaction and the comments that the readers find the most valuable. So, yeah.
Thank you. Michael, you've already commented already on the idea of posting your thoughts to blogs first, but I know it's something you've got quite a lot to say about. Can I ask you about the importance of blogs?
Well, one of my passions, and bear in mind I'm no longer employed at Bond University, so I can be free in my comments. But looking back over my time, one of my pet bees in the bonnet was being forced to produce 10-page journal papers in top closed A and B class journals, and that was the only thing that counted. I've come to a completely counter view. Via blogs, I've reached people who are not academics, but have equally good knowledge to myself in certain areas. And in order to reach that audience, i.e. the global community at large, we should stop publishing just for our academic peers. This dual audience should now always be the aim of everything that you write. I'm actually building up a sort of a definition of what I'm going to be calling a digest, which is a cut-down academic paper aimed at the world, written for the world, and also your peers. And of course it has to be open access, it has to be short. Writing in a short form is very hard, as I think we all know, and so will require new skills. And of course this has all been inspired by blogging, and I used to say to my colleagues over the last 3 or 4 years, well, I think 10 well-written blog posts are equivalent to 1 academic paper. Of course, it fell on deaf ears, generally, and especially on my managers who didn't count 10 blogs in place of a paper. But I honestly, truly believe we must now direct our writing to the world, not just to our academic peers. Just this morning in the Mendeley blog, some of you may use Mendeley, which is a social citation system. 2.5 million people around the world have pooled their references, essentially. And you never have to enter any data again. You just say, I want this paper, and automatically somewhere in the database there'll be that paper which you can cite. There they say, research is no longer a walled garden. It's global, it's open, and it belongs to the community. And I think, passionately believe that's the aim of our writing, and that's how it should be in the future.
Katrina, I believe that you actually didn't post an idea to a blog first and have lost a paper. Is that something I can ask you about?
Yeah, I had an incident a few years ago where I wrote a paper, a transplant paper, and I submitted it to a journal, and they rejected it. They said that it wasn't of interest. They didn't feel it was very novel and this and that. Okay, whatever. And lo and behold, I saw my almost exact same paper come out in that journal within, I don't know, a month or so. I was shocked. My paper, I had already sent it somewhere else, and a journal accepted it and did think it was novel and worthwhile. And so I got scooped by a peer reviewer who was reviewing my work at that journal. So it was tragic, but probably not, I'm not alone, I'm sure, in my little world of peer review experiences. But people have said, well, maybe if you would have talked about what you were doing and had some sort of a public exposure first, then you would have had maybe a leg to stand on or something. I don't know, but it was not a good experience to go through. Yeah.
Definitely. Being conscious of time, I'm going to have to skip a couple of slides forward and move to kind of a summation question. It's become quite clear from the comments from the panel that we shouldn't put all of our eggs in the one basket using the traditional forms of research and publication. It's get visible or vanish, not publish or perish. I'm going to throw it open to each of the panel members to make a call of advice for new players on how to get started. What advice can you all offer? We'll go down the line.
Yeah, maybe pick one form of social media. Don't try to canvas all of them and do everything, but pick one or two. I think the simplest ones to get started with are Twitter and LinkedIn, and my advice is to keep it business only and develop a network of people that are in your professional sphere, and it will really help you network and grow research opportunities, I guarantee you.
Tracy, can I ask you, we've got up on the board here the 7 habits of a highly visible PhD student.
Yep.
Is that something you can talk about?
Yeah, sure. Again, probably in a bit of direct comparison here, but I would actually say that you should be involved from a personal and professional point of view. My kind of general rule, and it's certainly for research or for business, I have a rule which I call the 50-25-25 rule. 50% of the time is on topic, so 50% of the time talk about your research, be dedicated to sharing that information. the next 25% of the time, it should be related to your research. So look for other people talking about the same thing, share what they're doing, engage with them. And the last 25% is you. It's not your research. It's not being professional. It's you and your personality. Social media, I think, certainly from PhD or business, you can become really self-focused and you can become very broadcast. So I think if you try and stick with that 50, 25, 25, it gives you more of a personality and people are more likely to engage with you as well. So that would be my kind of thoughts on that.
Fantastic. Jeff?
Given that the US government is spying on everyone, do nothing in social media, get off, pack it away, and hide in the closet. That's it. How's that for a bombshell? No. Okay. The larrikin in the crowd. Look, I don't know. I wish I did. I think the reason I'm sitting here in the middle is I have no idea what's going on. At the end of the day, I've studied it, I've tried to understand it, I've tried to come to terms with it, but at the end of the day, for me, I find social media really hard to accommodate. Maybe because I say yes to too many things, or maybe because I get too excited about things and jump in without thinking about them first. But I think if I guess reflecting on that, there is one piece of advice. It is probably to sit back for a week when you're starting this up and really plan it. Have a strategy. I really am attracted to the 50-25-25 rule, which is why I just tweeted it.
Well, like Jeff mentioned earlier, the Uber blogger who got his job at USC because of that. One of my models in the world of using social media for research is Professor Martin Weller from the Open University in the UK. He has written a book called Digital Scholarship, and I would point you at the chapter on digital scholarship for the researcher. And he gives quite a nice plan. In particular, I'm attracted to something he calls the network research cycle, and he gives you all the social media you can use to plan, to collect data, to analyze and reflect, what you do in order to get a PhD essentially, and how social media can be used in all of those phases. So I point you to that, and I think it's really excellent. And personally, I found blogging was the key for my research in social media, so I suggest you start there, but you do need some dedication to keep that going, and it's much easier to get involved in Twitter and LinkedIn in the first instance, and if you're just going to start slowly, I would start in those areas.
Michael, can I just follow up that question then with the advice to start the blog? Is there a particular blogging platform that you think is one that's best for researchers?
Well, I use WordPress. I have used WordPress primarily. I started by running my own server, or a server in the cloud, and putting WordPress on it, and every month I'd have to put a new version in and update the database. So I had to be a systems administrator, abandoned that and went to WordPress.com, where everything is done for you, it's free, and that's an excellent platform. But of late, I've also used, I've started a blog called Cloud Scholar, because that's really my main interest now, is using the cloud per se, not just social media. And that is on Blogger, and I find that an excellent platform too. But there are, of course, another half a dozen suitable blogging platforms you could use.
Could I just jump in on one point that Michael made that I think is really critical? There are several HDR students here today, and one of the pieces of advice for HDR students is keep writing. And given that, Dr. Brennan, you've been successful, you'd probably back this up. You've got to write constantly to get the thesis done. I think blogging is probably the best 21st century tool likely for an HDR student. If you want to take pieces of your project and get them out there, I would be blogging them.
I agree.
And Peter?
Yes, well, I'd like to echo what my colleagues have been saying here about the idea of being organised in advance and spending some time planning. Certainly, your digital footprint's out there. You don't just want it to, grow like mushrooms in the dark sort of thing and go crazy. You actually want to take some control over that, put some time into thinking about what your objectives are, and find out what are the best tools that's going to help you meet those objectives. I'd like to also echo what Tracy was talking about, the 25% that's about related research. Give a plug to your colleagues who are doing great work. Share the love around, engaging with close colleagues, but also people all around the world. It just opens up so many opportunities. So I think those are probably the key points from me.
Fantastic. Well, there's one question I'd just like to ask Tracy before we throw it over to questions from the audience, to go back to one of the things I missed. And that's handling negative comments on social networking, because there is the potential there for some kind of cyberbullying. Tracy?
Yeah. I like how the person who works for council gets asked about negative comments. Look, it's inevitable. You will get negative comments. My kind of rule, and it's only mine, but unless it's for an organisation or a researcher, is never delete an opinion. I think that it's really, really important to let other people have their opinion, even if you hate it. Obviously, there should be parameters around what's acceptable and what's not. So you should have some kind of community guidelines, especially if you're an organisation. And if there are things like, don't be homophobic, sexist, whatever it might be, that's fine. But you have to allow people to have their opinion, even if it's negative. And one of the great things, I think, is that if your community steps in on your behalf, it's really satisfying. It's super nice to sit back and just let your community do that for you and reply to that person. And you only really get there by being reciprocal and building that authority and trust with the community as well. And it's the same for researchers. Other people will step in and they will stick up for you, but you have to be reciprocal, so you have to be doing the same thing for them as well. Fantastic.
Well, with that concludes the organised part of the panel discussion. I want to throw it over to questions from the audience, if you have any.
So, hi, I'm Shelley Kanash, and I love this stuff, but I'm actually going to ask a devil's advocate question, and this comes in the context of my bachelor's degree was in English literature, and I'm the mother of 2 teenagers. Are we breeding laziness, particularly in Twitterature, and to take Michael's comment out of context that we'll never have to read a paper again? I'm worried. What about reading Romeo and Juliet rather than reading the tweeted version? What about, are we breeding laziness, surfing? Are we not going to go deep and rigorous and really contemplate ideas and thoughts and the beauty of words in the way that the authors have put them together?
Can I take that? Shelley, I wish that we had arranged this in advance and that was a Dorothy Dix, because it's a great question. And it feeds right into, I guess, my real interest in this space, and that is moral panics. Look, ever since the novel was popularized in the mid-19th century, people have been bemoaning the role of emerging media in children's lives, let alone adults, because we just have to protect children. The interesting thing is, I mean, I've collected works from reverends, back in the mid-19th century, talking about how children will be abnormally formed as their heads are bent downward and they're inside instead of outside, and they'll get malformation. And there was a dentist in Florida in the U.S. back in the 50s who coined the term television malocclusion. I mean, none of this stuff ever ends up happening. And one of the most interesting things to me is the intersections between new media and repurposing and reviving old and classical texts. I love the fact that the canon of literature is actually being reborn instead of lost. And I think what ultimately happens, and I have experienced this in my own home, as you know, I have 3 boys, the iPad and producing, for example, Shakespeare's sonnets, which are, not really for kids, it turns out, but that they are there and that they're exploring them and learning about Shakespeare through the iPad is, I think, something to celebrate. I'm not terribly worried about texting and a change in language. Linguists have pointed out that vowel sounds and diphthongs and consonants and spelling conventions have changed since the start of language. All you have to do is look at the difference between so-called American English, one oxymoron, and Australian English, another. I'll leave it there.
I think I want to respond to you too, Shelley, in 2 ways. For answering you in terms of professionalism and also in terms of writing style. I get emails from medical students that will say, hey, instead of, dear Dr. Bramstead. So, hey, can I come see you for an appointment? I mean, so yeah, it is transferring, crossing over into even how students address us and interface with us on a professional level, which I think is a bit of a problem. But going back to the writing in general, I've created a new course for the medical students on writing because I think it is so valuable, not just how to write a chart note, but writing in general and writing manuscripts. So yeah, we're trying to cover it from all angles.
Yeah, of course. My name's Ned Wells, ISDA here at Bond. I find, of course, there's two major challenges in the sort of digital arena, and one is the digital divide, and the other one is the digital overload. So I was wondering if you could give some suggestions on how to manage that. I do a lot of research with people who are not digitally engaged, not at all electronically engaged. And of course, I myself suffer from a lot of digital overload, so maybe you have some suggestions on how to manage that.
I think you have to be good at sifting. First, I limit what I get myself involved in. Like, we have different opinions here on the table. I've limited myself to two areas, so Twitter and LinkedIn mostly. So I don't overextend myself so that I don't get inundated with things that I just can't keep up with because I don't have the time. And then for the things that I do receive, I just try to be good at sifting and, being good with that delete button and not going off onto tangents that I don't have time for, and just really taking in things that are relevant and applicable.
I think that with the digital divide, it's a huge issue, certainly for larger organisations as well. It's an issue that we face probably every day in my role professionally, because a lot of the communities that we do want to engage with aren't always on some of the channels that we're engaging. So one of my key things is that social media is just a new channel or a different channel. It will never replace traditional channels, and we should never try and replace traditional channels. So even when we had the flood situation a couple of years ago, we were still out door knocking, and we were still out putting posters up in communities that we knew would not necessarily be, on Facebook and Twitter, which is where we were getting most of our engagement. So I think we have to continue those traditions, but make sure that we embrace new media as well.
Can I just comment on that one as well? I think all things that are worth some value to us are worth putting some time into as well. So, and I think there's too much value in this to be just saying, well, I don't have the time, I'm not going to bother. On the other hand, I think, you can end up having a huge number of people you're following on Twitter, for example, and start to feel like, I can't keep up with it all. But, you just have to get to a point where you go, I'm going to shrug that off. I'm not online all the time. I'm going to miss things. The really important things someone else will retweet, and gradually those really important things will come to my attention, or someone I know will go, hey, Peter will be interested in this. I'll add her, I'll mention her in this tweet and point her to this. So, some of it's just about letting go, living in the moment, and some of it's about pointing your attention to where you get the most value.
The question about the digital divide hasn't been responded to yet, so I might just mention that. I think it's one of our greatest challenges, and probably is one of the challenges of social media right now. There's a digital divide that crosses, obviously, socioeconomic status. It also crosses age, and it crosses professions. And I think, particularly the older professoriate, my more senior and learned colleague, Michael Reese notwithstanding, I think you don't find very many people our age engaged or interested at all in social media. And I think that's a great risk to the academy, and it's probably something we need to address. And we might need to be comfortable with you being a single letter word.
Just following on from that, in my extracurricular activities now, I meet friends and neighbours, but more particularly I do radio-controlled sailing, and I meet my fellow sailors who are very similar age to me or older. And they suffer from this digital divide. And I've been quite surprised that, we meet for coffee after our sailing, and each week I get asked about things or I offer advice, and I've been surprised how easily absorbed, just one or two important facts or important techniques on using computers have been, and how gradually, you know, they're moving forward. And it's not so difficult to bridge the digital divide if you do it carefully, slowly, and incrementally, I found. Same for neighbours, you know, I go in perhaps once a week and fix something up for them, and I've been surprised how much of that actually sort of strikes home and they can do it for themselves thereafter. So I'm not afraid of this digital divide, but we just have to be willing to, you know, offer sensible advice to these people and get them going on information technology.
Awesome. I'm going to hand it over to Wendy Abbott, the University Librarian, for the closing remarks. I just want to quickly say this is the first time I've seen people continually using social media in an education setting and doing it productively throughout.
Okay, well I just want to thank the panel. The panel was coordinated by Peter Hopkins, who did a lot of the legwork getting the panel session together. Joe Hare, who's been operating the slides, also had a big role in coordinating all the activities of the panel. Thanks to Dave Honeyman, who's on the camera there, and Gail White, who was on the microphone, and also a big thank you to Chris Hindley, who's doing his usual impeccable AV recording job. Thank you very much again, Chris. But the panel session owes everything to the panel members. And I would really like to thank them for their commitment, enthusiasm, erudition. It's been a terrific session, and certainly I've learnt so much in just, we had quite a couple of meetings before we had this session, so we did a bit of preparing, but in the session today, learning everything from them in their expertise to do with using social media for professional purposes. So can we just please all thank the panel, and to Daniel, who kept it all flowing so smoothly. Thank you, Daniel.